Take the trash out. Derek said it to the officer, his diamond cufflinks catching the chandelier light as he gestured toward the woman in handcuffs. Sir, I own this building. Her voice was flat, quiet, completely without panic. Derek laughed short and sharp. You own a mop and a broken tablet. People like you belong in cages, not ballrooms. He stepped forward. His hand came down on her shoulder with a slow, deliberate weight, manicured fingernails pressing into the cotton fabric. You will rot in a cell while I drink champagne. Clara did not flinch. She did not look at him. She looked down at the cracked screen by her scuffed shoes, at the single word glowing white against the marble floor. Her thumb found the edge of the iPad. She pressed once. Every door in the ballroom sealed with a single iron clang that shook the floor beneath 500 pairs of expensive shoes. Clara looked up. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Actually, Derek, you are the one who...
Pure audacity. He's digging his own grave right now and smiling about it. Keep watching.
Clara arrived before the sun did. She moved through the grand lobby alone, her rubber soles barely making a sound on the cold, polished marble. The centerpiece was massive, a towering arrangement of white orchids, pale ferns, and trailing jasmine. She worked quietly, steadily, adjusting each stem with practiced hands. By 7 in the morning, the lobby smelled of fresh flowers and furniture polish. By 8, the first guests would arrive. She had exactly 1 hour. She was reaching for the last cluster of jasmine when she heard them. The click of expensive loafers, the low private laughter of two people sharing a secret. She did not turn around. She kept her hands moving, her eyes forward, her breathing even. Derek walked in first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke Italian silk tuxedo that caught the lobby light like polished armor. Chloe walked beside him, not behind him. That detail was small. It was not nothing. She wore a bridesmaid sash across a fitted dress that cost more than Clara's monthly salary. Her chin was lifted, her smile private, her hand brushing Derek's sleeve with the easy familiarity of a woman who knew exactly where she stood. Clara did not move. She held a stem of jasmine between two fingers and waited. Derek spotted her immediately. He slowed his pace, his gaze traveling from her worn canvas shoes up to her faded cotton uniform, taking inventory the way a man does when he has already decided something is worthless. He kept walking. He did not change his path. His expensive loafer came down directly on the toe of Clara's scuffed shoe with a flat, deliberate weight. She did not step back. She did not make a sound. Derek looked down. He lifted his foot slowly, and what he saw made his expression shift from boredom to theatrical disgust. A faint smudge, barely visible, marked the leather near his toe. He exhaled sharply, a sound like a man who had just encountered something deeply offensive. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a silk handkerchief, cream-colored, monogrammed, and he crouched not quickly, but slowly, making a performance of wiping the $1,000 imported loafer clean. He took his time. He wanted an audience. Chloe provided one. She covered her mouth with a manicured hand and laughed, a short, bright sound that carried across the marble floor. Honestly, Derek said, standing straight again, his voice carrying easily to the cluster of early staff near the entrance. He did not lower his voice. He had no reason to. The poverty stench in this place. You'd think they could at least find planners who wash. Clara bit the inside of her cheek. Hard. The metallic tang of blood touched the back of her tongue, sharp and immediate. Derek's cologne was thick and expensive, a suffocating blend of cedar and bergamot that pressed against the delicate jasmine and corrupted it. She swallowed. She kept her hands still, playing cheap games on a cheap toy instead of working. Derek added, his gaze dropping to the battered iPad resting on the table beside her arrangement. He said it the way men like him say everything casually, carelessly, the way a person flicks an insect off a sleeve. He had already looked away before the sentence was finished. Chloe laughed again, softer this time, her eyes already moving toward the ballroom. Clara did not look up. She set down the jasmine stem. She picked up the iPad. Her thumb moved across the surface twice, adjusting the lobby's air conditioning by 3 degrees. The soft hum of the ventilation system shifted. The temperature dropped. Neither Derek nor Chloe noticed. She watched them walk away, their steps unhurried, their voices dropping into private murmurs as they moved through the archway toward the bridal suite corridor. Derek's hand found the small of Chloe's back. He left it there. Clara watched until they disappeared. Across the lobby near the staff entrance, the estate's head of security stood with a clipboard. He was a broad, quiet man named Marcus, 14 years with the property, 3 years under the current ownership structure. He had seen the entire exchange. His jaw was tight. When Clara's gaze finally reached him, he gave a single, nearly imperceptible bow of his head, dropping his eyes to the floor for just a moment before raising them again. Clara held his gaze briefly. Then she looked back at her flowers. She adjusted the last stem of jasmine. She stepped back, tilted her head slightly, and examined the arrangement with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world. The orchids were perfect. The ferns were balanced. The trailing jasmine fell exactly where it should. She set the iPad face down on the table, but arrogance, she knew, always leaves a trail of evidence. Derek had stepped on her shoe, wiped it clean, and walked away satisfied. He had made her invisible. He had made her small, worthless, and forgettable in front of staff, in front of cameras, in front of walls that had been listening to every word spoken in this building for the past 3 years. She picked up her tote bag. She moved toward the next room. She did not hurry. Clara finished her walkthrough of the main ballroom at 9:30. She moved down the service corridor alone, her tote bag over one shoulder, her iPad tucked under her arm. The hallway was narrow and fluorescent lit, a deliberate contrast to the grand flower-filled spaces on the other side of the wall. She had designed it that way. Guests never saw the service corridors. They were not meant to. She turned toward the venue office at the far end of the hall. She needed to confirm the catering deposit receipt with the head caterer before the kitchen staff clocked in for the afternoon shift. She was 3 doors away when her pace slowed. The office door was closed. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the sound coming through it. A voice, low-clipped and tightly controlled, the voice of a man trying very hard to sound calm and failing at every third word. Clara stopped. She did not move closer. She stood still, her rubber soles silent on the concrete floor, and she listened. "I told you," Derek said. "I told you I would have it today. Do not call me again before noon." A pause, then quieter, harder. 50, exactly 50. "I am not negotiating the number, I am negotiating the time. There is a difference." Another pause, longer. His breathing was audible now, shallow and fast. "Fine. By 2:00. Do not call this number again." Silence. Clara stepped back 2 paces. She turned and walked in the opposite direction, her steps unhurried, her expression unchanged. She rounded the corner toward the floral staging area and stopped beside a rolling cart of white ribbon spools. She set her iPad on the cart. She waited exactly 4 minutes. Then she walked back. The office door was closed but no longer locked. She could tell by the angle of the frame, a detail only someone who had spent 3 years memorizing every door in this building would notice. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was empty. Neat, quiet, and empty. The desk was undisturbed. The filing cabinet was closed. Everything looked precisely as it should. Clara crossed to the far side of the desk and crouched beside the small steel safe built into the lower cabinet. She examined it without touching it. The dial had been turned. Not reset, not locked, but turned to a stopping point and left the way. A person turns a dial in a hurry and does not think about what they leave behind. She stood up slowly. She looked at the tote bag hanging on the hook beside the door. Her tote bag canvas worn, the strap fraying at one end, left there during her morning setup walk because the office was always locked, always safe, always hers. She crossed to it. She did not open it. She looked at the shape of it, the slight, unfamiliar stiffness near the inside lining a small rectangular pressure against the fabric that had not been there this morning. She did not reach inside. She took the bag off the hook. She set it carefully on the desk. She stepped back and looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something when you already know what it contains and you are deciding what to do with that knowledge. Above her head, mounted in the far corner of the ceiling where the wall met the ventilation duct, a small dome camera blinked once. Slowly. Red. The light was barely visible, no larger than a pinhead set flush against the housing so that anyone who did not know to look for it would never find it. It blinked, and it recorded, and it sent everything it saw directly to a private encrypted network that had exactly one administrator. Clara picked up her tote bag. She put it back over her shoulder. She walked out of the office, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft final click. In the corridor, she passed a junior florist carrying a tray of button roses. She passed a linen attendant with a stack of pressed tablecloths. She passed a sous chef walking briskly toward the kitchen with a clipboard. None of them looked at her twice. She was the wedding planner. She was always moving, always present, always unremarkable. At the far end of the corridor near the east stairwell, a figure turned the corner and disappeared. The movement was brief, unhurried, a shape in a tuxedo jacket gone before the eye could fully register it. Clara did not stop walking. She noted it the way she noted everything in this building, quietly, completely, and without expression. She rounded the corner toward the bridal suite wing. She had a schedule to keep. The bride's bouquet needed a final check. The ceremony arch required one more pass before the photographer arrived. There were 17 items left on her morning list, and she intended to complete every single one. She smiled at Derek when she passed him in the stairwell 2 minutes later. It was a small, professional smile, courteous and forgettable. He looked through her the way he had looked through her all morning, the way men like him always look through women like her. He smiled at no one in particular and kept walking. He had no idea the walls had already recorded everything. The reception began at 6. By 6:30, the ballroom was full. 500 guests filled the gilded space from wall to wall, their voices layered into a single continuous roar of laughter and clinking crystal. The chandeliers burned at full intensity, throwing warm, fractured light across silk gowns and tailored jackets, and the kind of jewelry that does not get worn twice. The band played something smooth and expensive near the east wall. Waitstaff moved between tables with the precise, silent efficiency of people who had been trained never to be noticed. Clara stood near the service entrance at the back of the room. She had her iPad. She had her tote bag. She had her list, and every item on it was checked. She was watching the door when the head caterer walked in. His name was Raymond, and he did not look like a man who had come to enjoy the reception. He was a broad, deliberate figure in a pressed white uniform, and he moved through the crowd the way a cold front moves across open water steadily and without apology. Clara watched him scan the room. She watched him locate the venue manager near the bar. She watched the brief, tight exchange between them two men whose faces said the same thing at the same time. Something was wrong. Raymond turned. His eyes found Derek at the head table, laughing at something Chloe had leaned over to whisper. Raymond crossed the room. He did not weave politely between guests. He walked in a straight line, and the guests moved for him without being asked. He reached the band first. He said 2 words to the conductor. The music stopped. 500 people noticed immediately. The laughter tapered. The crystal stopped clinking. The room held its breath in the sudden, suspended silence of a crowd that senses something has shifted but does not yet know what. Raymond's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. In a room that quiet, a measured voice carries to every corner. The catering account, he said, his gaze fixed on Derek, is short $50,000. The cash deposit for this evening's service is missing. I will not continue operations until it is accounted for. The silence deepened. Clara felt the heat of 500 pairs of eyes beginning to move, searching the room, looking for an explanation, looking for a face to attach to the problem. Derek stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. He adjusted one diamond cufflink, and then the other, unhurried, deliberate performing composure, For an audience he had already decided was his. When he spoke, his voice carried the particular outrage of a man who has rehearsed it. "I know exactly what happened to it," he said. He turned. He looked directly at Clara. The crowd turned with him. 500 heads all at once, all in the same direction. Clara felt the heat rush to her face before she could stop it. A dizzying, nauseating wave of warmth that started at her collar and climbed to her temples. Her chest was steady. Her hands were still. But the heat came anyway, the body's honest response to being hunted in public, and she could not prevent it. Derek crossed the room. He was not hurrying. He was savoring it each step, slow and certain, his eyes on her the entire way. He reached her in 15 seconds. In those 15 seconds, not one person in the room spoke. He grabbed the strap of her tote bag. He lifted it off her shoulder with a single violent motion and upended it over the marble floor. Everything fell. A crushed pack of mints, a cheap plastic comb with 2 missing teeth, a folded tissue, a hair tie, 3 loose coins that rang out sharply against the imported Italian marble and spun in separate directions before settling, a lip balm without a cap, a small notepad with a bent cover, and then last, slower than the rest, a single sheet of paper that caught the air briefly and drifted down in a lazy sideways arc before landing face up on the floor between them. A deposit slip, crisp, official, and entirely false. The room exhaled, not with relief, with judgment. Clara heard it, that collective, barely audible release of breath that means a crowd has already decided. She looked down at the slip on the floor. She looked at her belongings scattered across the marble, the small, meager inventory of a woman who traveled light, each item now exposed and pathetic under 500 watts of chandelier light. The crushed mints, the comb, the 3 coins still settling. She did not crouch down. She did not reach for the slip. She did not touch a single thing. Derek stood over her scattered belongings, his posture straight, his expression satisfied. He turned to face the room with the slow, expansive ease of a man taking a bow. Across the ballroom, at a round table near the center of the room, Chief Rotimi set down his champagne glass. He did not stand. He did not speak. He simply narrowed his eyes, not at Clara, not at the deposit slip on the floor, but at Derek, at the speed of it, at how quickly the bag had been grabbed, upended, and emptied before a single question had been asked. A man finds evidence that fast only when he already knows where it is. Clara felt it before she understood it, the slight shift in the room's attention, a fraction of weight lifting from her shoulders and settling somewhere else. She kept her gaze down. She kept her hands at her sides. She let the silence do its work. The net was pulled tight, but Clara was not the one trapped inside it.
Wait, absolutely not. He stole his own bride's money to buy a car for his mistress and framed the poor planner in public. If that were me, I would have lost my mind right there on the dance floor. Imagine standing in front of 500 wealthy people while a monster ruins your life. The audacity is terrifying.
The police arrived at 6:53. Clara heard the sirens before the doors opened, a distant rising wail that cut through the ballroom's suspended silence like something cold and final. The guests heard it too. Heads turned toward the main entrance, shoulders stiffened. The particular uncomfortable stillness of wealthy people confronting an institution they preferred to keep at a distance settled across the room like a change in air pressure. 2 officers came through the doors first, then a third. Their uniforms were pressed, their radios crackling with the harsh, irregular static of an open channel, that sharp, metallic snap of white noise cutting against the soft, expensive hum of the ballroom's central air conditioning. The contrast was jarring. It was meant to be. Derek met them at the entrance. He had crossed the room before they were fully through the doors, his hand extended, his posture easy and welcoming, the posture of a man greeting people he had called himself. The lead officer shook his hand. Derek leaned in and spoke quietly, one palm resting on the officer's shoulder, his head tilted in the practiced collegial angle of a man used to having conversations that go his way. Clara watched from where she stood. She had not moved. Her belongings were still scattered across the marble at her feet. The coins, the comb, the deposit slip, the small exposed inventory of a woman who had already been tried and convicted by the room before a single officer had taken a statement. She did not look at the floor. She kept her eyes forward. Derek turned. He pointed at her. The lead officer looked up. His gaze traveled across the room and found Clara with the efficient, dispassionate focus of a man doing a job. He said something to the officer beside him. They started walking. "Don't take her outside," Derek said. His voice was clear and deliberate pitch to carry. He wanted the room to hear it. He wanted the room to watch. "Do it here, in front of everyone, so there's no question about what kind of person we're dealing with." The officer hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he kept walking. Clara felt the room contract around her. 500 people still seated, still silent, watching with the particular wide-eyed attention of a crowd that knows it is witnessing something it will describe to other people for years. She stood straight. She kept her chin level. She allowed herself exactly nothing, no trembling, no tears, no visible crack in the surface, because she understood instinctively that any display of distress would be interpreted as guilt, and any display of composure would be interpreted as arrogance, and Derek had already ensured that the room would read her wrong either way. The officer reached her. He was a young man younger than she had expected, with a tight jaw and careful eyes that told her he was uncomfortable and working hard not to show it. "Ma'am," he said, quietly, almost gently. The handcuffs came out. Heavy, dull iron, the metal warm from his belt but cooling fast against her skin, as the first cuff locked around her left wrist with a sound that was not loud, but carried anyway that sharp, definitive click, cutting through the silence in a way that made several guests flinch visibly. The second cuff followed. She felt the weight of them immediately, that solid, unyielding pressure against her thin, unadorned wrists, and beside her, close enough that Clara could see the enormous diamond catching chandelier light from 3 angles at once, Sarah stood frozen. The bride's hand was pressed flat against her collarbone. Her face was the face of a woman watching something she did not have the framework to process. Derek positioned himself 4 feet away. He straightened his silk lapel. He adjusted both diamond cufflinks with slow, deliberate fingers, one and then the other, and he watched Clara with the particular unhurried satisfaction of a man who had waited all day for this specific moment and found it exactly as gratifying as he had anticipated. Clara's thumb was 1 inch from a specific blank icon on her iPad screen. She had been moving toward it slowly, carefully, her fingers shifting their grip on the edge of the tablet with the patient precision of a woman who knows exactly what she is reaching for and exactly how much time she has left to reach it. The officer's hand came down on the iPad, not harshly, not with force, but with the firm, practiced motion of someone trained to secure potential evidence. The tablet clattered to the marble. The screen flashed once on impact and then went dark. Clara looked down at it. She said nothing. Behind her, somewhere near the center of the room, she heard Derek exhale a long, slow, deeply satisfied breath, the sound of a man releasing tension he had been holding since morning. "People like her," he said to no one and everyone, his voice smooth and unhurried, "belong in cages." Clara did not respond. She did not look at him. She looked at the floor, at her iPad lying face down on the cold marble, at the faint blinking edge of a screen that had not gone entirely dark. A single pixel of pale light visible at the corner of the casing, small, quiet, and patient. She had managed 1 action before the iPad fell. 1 thumb movement. 4 seconds of contact. The text had already been sent. The officers turned her toward the door. They began to walk. The crowd parted in silence, guests pulling their chairs back, pressing themselves away from her path with the reflexive, instinctive recoil of people who have decided something is contagious. She walked between the officers, her head level, her wrists bound, her scuffed shoes, making their quiet, familiar sound against the marble. The door was 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. The night had not yet reached its peak. They stopped her 5 feet from the door. not the officers. The officers were still walking, still moving her forward with the steady professional momentum of men completing a task. What stopped them was a voice, a single voice, unhurried and absolute, the kind of voice that does not raise itself because it has never needed to. Stop. Chief Rotimi did not stand immediately. He set his napkin on the table first. He pushed his chair back slowly. He straightened his jacket with 2 short, precise tugs at the lapels, and only then did he rise to his full height, a broad, deliberate figure in a dark suit, his face carrying the particular settled weight of a man who has spent 40 years making decisions that other people spent 40 years living with. "Officer," he said, his voice traveling across the silent ballroom with the calm, unhurried authority of something that had never once been ignored. "That woman does not leave this room until I have had exactly 60 seconds with these proceedings. An innocent woman's dignity is worth more than a rushed arrest." The lead officer stopped. He looked at Chief Rotimi. He looked at Derek. He looked back at Chief Rotimi, and something in that second look told Clara that the calculus had already shifted, that the officer had already performed a rapid private assessment of which man in this room carried more consequence, and had arrived at the obvious answer. 60 seconds, yes, the officer said. He did not move forward. Derek's jaw tightened. It was a small movement barely visible from across the room, but Clara was close enough to see it. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. He produced a smile instead, thin and controlled, the smile of a man recalculating. "By all means," Derek said, spreading one hand in a generous theatrical arc. "Let the old man have his moment." Chief Rotimi did not look at Derek when Derek spoke. He was already walking toward Clara, his steps measured, and even his gaze fixed on her face with an attention that was not pitying but assessing, careful and entirely without performance. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Clara looked back at him. She was aware of everything at once, the weight of the handcuffs, the heat still sitting in her face, the 500 people watching in absolute silence, Derek's presence behind her like a cold draft from an open window. She was aware of all of it, and she held none of it in her expression. She had been holding things out of her expression since 7 o'clock that morning, but the exhaustion was there. It lived behind her sternum, a deep, settled tiredness that had nothing to do with the hours she had worked. It was the exhaustion of pretending. 3 years of faded uniforms and scuffed shoes and swallowed insults, 3 years of being invisible inside a building she owned completely. 3 years of watching the way wealth moved through a room, the easy arrogance of it, the assumption that a woman in worn rubber soles had nothing of value to offer and nothing of consequence to protect. She had chosen it. She had designed the performance herself deliberately carefully because she needed to know the truth of how her estate ran when no one believed the person watching them mattered. She had found out. "Keep your chin up," Chief Rotimi said. Quietly. Only for her. His voice was low and direct, stripped of ceremony, the voice of a man who speaks to the point because he has never had time for anything else. "I have been watching this room all evening. A guilty woman does not stand the way you are standing." Clara said nothing. She held his gaze and said nothing because there was nothing to say, and because she understood in the particular intuitive way of people who have spent years reading rooms that Chief Rotimi was not offering comfort. He was buying time. He was standing in the gap between her and the door, and he was using his 60 seconds with the precision of a man who knows exactly what 60 seconds is worth. Behind her, Derek shifted his weight. The sound of his loafer on the marble was small and sharp, the sound of a man growing impatient with a scene he could no longer fully control. He leaned in. She felt him before she heard him, that suffocating cedar and bergamot cologne pressing close, his breath warm against the side of her face. "Enjoy the next few hours," Derek said. His voice was barely a whisper, intimate and deliberate, shaped for her alone. "You will rot in a damp cell while I drink champagne. That uniform will be the last clean thing you wear for a very long time." His manicured fingernails pressed into her shoulder as he said it, a brief, sharp pressure, deliberate and precise, the physical punctuation of a man making sure his point lands. Clara did not flinch. She did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on Chief Rautami, who was watching Derek's hand on her shoulder with the quiet, steady attention of a man adding an item to a list. On the marble floor, 3 feet from her scuffed left shoe, her iPad lay face down and still. Then it did not. The screen brightened from the bottom edge, a thin, pale line of light spreading slowly across the casing, and then the full screen came alive, face down, glowing against the marble, with a cold, clean brightness that sent a faint reflection climbing the nearby chair leg. One word was visible, reversed in the marble surface, shimmering in white. Ready! Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter and more certain, the feeling of a door swinging open on a well-oiled hinge. She only needed one finger. Clara looked down at the iPad. She looked at it the way you look at something you have been waiting for all day, quietly, without surprise. The way a person looks at a door they have always known would open. Then she looked at the lead officer beside her. "May I," she said, "pick up my cheap toy?" It was not a question. The phrasing was a question. The voice was not. The voice was level and patient, and carried beneath it a register that had nothing to do with the woman in the faded uniform, nothing to do with the fraying tote bag, or the scuffed rubber soles, or the 3 coins still lying scattered across the marble floor. It was the voice of someone who has never needed to raise it. The officer looked at her. He looked at Chief Rautami. He stepped aside. Clara crouched. She picked up the iPad with both cuffed hands, her movements unhurried and precise. She stood. She held the battered tablet in front of her, its cracked casing and scratched screen catching the chandelier light in the particular undignified way of a thing that has been used hard and maintained poorly. Derek, 4 feet away, watched her with the relaxed, lidded expression of a man watching the final, predictable move of a game he had already won. She pressed the screen once with her right thumb. The sound came first. A single resonant tone, low and electronic, the kind of sound that does not ask for attention, but commands it instantly. Every head in the room turned before anyone understood why. Then the lights changed. Not off, not dark, but dimmed all of them simultaneously, the 500 watts of chandelier brilliance dropping in a single coordinated breath to something lower and more deliberate, the kind of light that says, "This is intentional." Then the doors moved, all of them. Every entrance and exit in the grand ballroom, the main double doors, the east service entrance, the west corridor, access the private exit behind the dais, all of them swinging shut in the same moment with a heavy mechanical finality. The deadbolts engaged a half-second later, each one a separate metallic clang that sent a literal vibration through the souls of every person standing on the marble floor. Clara felt it travel up through her worn rubber soles, through her ankles, through her knees, a low physical confirmation that moved through her like a tuning fork finding its note. 500 people heard it. 500 people felt it. The silence that followed was not the silence of a crowd waiting for something. It was the silence of a crowd that had just understood something, that had just recalibrated, that was sitting very still while the room rearranged itself around a fact they had not previously possessed. From the ceiling directly above the center of the ballroom floor, a mechanical arm descended. Slowly, smoothly, without drama. It lowered a projector screen 20 feet wide, white and taut, unrolling, with the quiet, certain patience of something that has always been there, waiting above the plaster and the gilding and the chandelier fixtures, ready for exactly this moment. Derek's expression had not changed yet. He was still wearing the relaxed, lidded look of a man who believed he was watching desperation. He glanced at the screen. He glanced at the doors. He looked back at Clara. And then Clara changed. It was not a single movement. It was a reordering, a series of small, simultaneous shifts that taken individually meant nothing and taken together meant everything. Her shoulders dropped back and down, her spine extended. Her chin rose by exactly the degree required to change the geometry of her face from someone being looked at to someone doing the looking. The battered iPad, cracked casing, and all rose in her cuffed hands until she was holding it the way a person holds something that belongs to them. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was so quiet, so controlled, so completely stripped of effort that every person in the room leaned forward by some small involuntary degree to receive it. "My name, she said, is Clara Voss." A pause, clean and deliberate. "I am the sole owner of the Grand Orchid Estate. I have been the sole owner for 3 years. Every camera in this building reports to my private network. Every door in this building responds to my private device." She looked at Derek, directly, without blinking. "Every conversation held in every room of this property since the day I took ownership has been recorded, cataloged, and stored on an encrypted server that requires my personal authorization to access." Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I want the handcuffs removed," Clara said, her gaze moving to the lead officer with the calm, specific attention of someone issuing a correction rather than a request. The officer looked at his superior. His superior looked at the screen. The screen had begun to glow a deep preparatory blue, the color of something about to begin. The cuffs came off. The metal was warm now, warmed by her skin, and the absence of it felt like the first clean breath after a long time underwater. She did not rub her wrists. She did not look down at them. She kept her eyes on the room. Derek found his voice. It came out wrong, too fast, too high, stripped of the easy, practiced authority it had carried all day. "This is insane," he said. "She is a planner. She is a nobody. This is a stunt." He turned to the room, both hands out performing certainty for an audience that was no longer watching him. "Don't let her do this." The room did not respond to Derek. The room was watching the screen. The footage began without announcement. No title. No introduction. Clean, sharp, 4K resolution timestamp in the upper right corner, reading 9:41 a.m., the venue office, the steel safe in the lower cabinet, a figure in a bespoke Italian silk tuxedo crouching in front of it, his back to the camera, his shoulders moving with the quick practiced efficiency of someone who has already decided to do the thing and simply needs to finish doing it. Derek on the screen stood up. He turned slightly. The camera caught his profile, the jaw, the brow, the diamond cufflink catching the fluorescent light of the service corridor as he tucked something into the breast pocket of his tuxedo with a careful, deliberate hand. Then he crossed to the door. He lifted a canvas tote bag from the hook. He reached inside. He removed something from his breast pocket and pressed it into the lining of the bag, smoothing the fabric flat with 2 fingers, gentle and thorough, the way a person hides something they are certain will never be found. He hung the bag back on the hook. He straightened his jacket. He left. The timestamp read 9:44 a.m., 3 minutes. From entry to exit. Neat, complete, and entirely visible. The ballroom was so quiet that Clara could hear the ventilation system running above the ceiling. She could hear the faint distant sound of traffic from the street outside. She could hear Derek breathing rapid and shallow 4 feet to her left, the sound of a man whose entire architecture had just collapsed from the inside. She looked at him. She held the battered iPad at her side, easy and loose, the way you hold something when you no longer need to prove what it is. Derek's smile was gone, completely. The relaxed-lidded expression, the easy authority, the theatrical outrage, all of it gone. What remained was a face without a performance, and it was a remarkably small face for a man who had taken up so much room all day. The hunter had just become the prey. The footage did not stop. It moved forward in time, the timestamp advancing in clean digital increments, each number precise and indifferent the way evidence always is. The ballroom stayed silent. Nobody reached for their champagne. Nobody leaned over to whisper to their neighbor. 500 people sat in the particular suspended stillness of witnesses, their attention fixed on the 20-foot screen with the focused, unblinking concentration of people who understand that what they are watching cannot be unseen. 9:51 a.m., the service corridor, East Wing, Derek and Chloe. standing close, too close, the body language of two people who have stopped pretending when they believe no one is watching. His hand on her jaw, her fingers curled into his lapel. The kiss was not brief. It was not ambiguous. It lasted long enough for the timestamp to advance by 40 seconds, long enough for every person in the room to absorb every detail of it, long enough for Sarah, standing 6 feet from the screen, to make a sound that was not a word. It was small, barely audible. The sound a person makes when something they believed in stops being true. Clara did not look at Sarah. Not yet. She kept her gaze on the screen, her posture straight, her hands still at her sides, giving the footage the respect of her full, quiet attention. The timestamp moved again. 9:44 a.m., the office, the safe, the tote bag. Everything the room had just seen in Chapter 6 now playing again in sequence, now arriving in context, now landing with the full accumulated weight of everything that had come before it. The theft, the kiss, the frame. 3 minutes of a man's character rendered in 4K resolution, time-stamped and irrefutable. The screen went dark. The projector arm rose slowly back toward the ceiling, retracting with the same quiet, mechanical patience with which it had descended, folding itself back into the plaster and the gilding as though it had never been there at all. The chandeliers returned to full brightness. The room came back into sharp, honest light, and in that light every face was visible, and on every face was a version of the same expression. Sarah was standing exactly where she had stood in Chapter 1. Exactly the same spot, the same imported marble beneath her heels, the same chandelier above her head. She had watched Clara be insulted in this spot. She had watched Derek make his performance of disgust in this spot. She was standing in it now in her wedding dress with her enormous diamond catching light from 3 angles, and she was looking at her husband with an expression that had moved entirely beyond hurt into something quieter and more absolute. She crossed the floor in 8 steps. Measured deliberate, her heels striking the marble with a clean, rhythmic precision that the whole room heard. She stopped in front of Derek. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, the kind of second that contains an entire reckoning. Then her palm connected with his cheek. The crack of it was sharp and clean and total, a single sound that rang out across the silent ballroom and bounced off the gilded walls and came back again the way sounds do in rooms built for acoustics. Derek's head snapped sideways. He stumbled back 1 step, his hand flying up to his face, his eyes wide with the particular stunned expression of a man who has spent his entire life operating in a world where consequences belong to other people. Chloe, standing 3 feet behind him, took 1 step backward and said nothing. Sarah did not look at Chloe. She looked at Derek. Her hand still raised, her chest rising and falling with the slow, controlled breathing of a woman who has more to say and has chosen silence instead. Then she turned. She walked back across the marble. She sat down at her table. She picked up her champagne glass and she set it down again without drinking from it. And she looked at no one, and no one looked back at her because some moments require the dignity of not being witnessed too closely. Clara watched all of it. She stood in the same spot she had occupied since the footage ended, her iPad at her side, her posture easy and unhurried. Then she turned to Marcus, who had been standing near the service entrance since the deadbolts engaged, broad and quiet and entirely unsurprised, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes steady. "Unlock the doors," Clara said. Marcus nodded once. He pressed 2 buttons on the panel beside him. The deadbolts disengaged across the ballroom in a single sequential series of clean metallic clicks, each door releasing in turn east to west, the sound traveling across the room like a resolution. The lead officer was already moving. He crossed to Derek with the purposeful, unhurried stride of a man who had spent the last 20 minutes reassessing the situation and had arrived at a conclusion. He reached for his cuffs. The same cuffs. Dull iron, heavy, warm from his belt. Derek backed up 1 step. Then he stopped because there was nowhere to go and because the room was watching and because even Derek understood that the performance was over. The cuffs locked around his wrists, one and then the other. The sound was identical to the sound they had made on Clara's wrists an hour earlier, that same sharp, definitive click, and it landed in the silent room with an entirely different weight. "Derek Sala," the officer said, his voice level and procedural. "You are under arrest for grand theft." Derek said nothing. His tuxedo was immaculate. His cufflinks still caught the light. He looked from a distance exactly as he had looked at the beginning of the evening, polished, expensive, and entirely assembled. But his face had nothing left in it. The performance, the ease, the theatrical authority, all of it had evacuated completely, leaving behind something diminished and genuinely small. They walked him past Clara. He was looking at the floor. He did not look up. "Watch the uniform, Derek," Clara said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, quiet enough that only he could hear it. She did not look at him when she said it. She looked straight ahead, her posture straight, her worn rubber soles planted on the cold marble of the floor she owned. "It is the last thing you will see before your cage." His footsteps moved away. Then the doors closed behind him. Clara looked at the room. The room looked at Clara. 500 people in their silk and their diamonds and their expensive imported leather, all of them perfectly still, all of them recalibrating, all of them performing the quiet, private arithmetic of people who have just been reminded that the person they overlooked was the one holding every key in the building. She tucked the iPad under her arm. She picked up her tote bag from the marble floor, her belongings still scattered around it. The coins, the comb, the crushed mints. She crouched and gathered them one by one, unhurried, without embarrassment, the way you collect things that belong to you. She stood up. She straightened her faded cotton uniform. Then she walked back to work.
The pure, explosive satisfaction of seeing an arrogant bully fall into his own trap is unmatched. If you were in Clara's shoes, holding the power to lock those doors, would you have exposed him in front of the whole ballroom or handled it privately behind closed doors? Tell me exactly how you would have served his karma in the comments below. And if you crave more stories of epic justice, stick around.